On March 12, 1996, the small town of Oakwood, Ohio, population just under 9,000, experienced a tragedy that would haunt its residents for nearly 3 decades. 16-year-old Jennifer Lawson vanished during a routine 15-minute walk home from volleyball practice at Oakwood High School, leaving behind only scattered personal items and a community gripped by fear and disbelief. Jennifer was the kind of teenager that embodied the spirit of small-town America. A junior at Oakwood High with a 3.8 GPA, she balanced academics with her position as middle hitter on the varsity volleyball team. Her photography had twice been featured in the local newspaper's student showcase, and she volunteered weekends at the Oakwood Public Library helping with children's reading programs. Neighbors described her as unfailingly polite and mature beyond her years. Jenny never missed curfew, never even came close. Her mother, Patricia Lawson, an elementary school teacher, told reporters at the time. When 7 o'clock came and went, I knew something was wrong. By 7:30, I was frantic. The evening had started normally enough. Security footage from Oakwood High School captured Jennifer leaving the gymnasium at 6:15 p.m., wearing jeans, her green Oakwood Owls varsity jacket, and carrying both her backpack and gym bag. She waved goodbye to teammates and declined a ride from her coach, saying she wanted the fresh air after being in the stuffy gym. Her route home was well established, down Maple Street, past Cunningham Park, and through the residential neighborhood where the Lawsons had lived for 12 years. On most days, the walk took 15 minutes at most. The route was well lit and considered extremely safe in a town that prided itself on its low crime rate and where most residents left their doors unlocked. That evening, however, something went terribly wrong. At 7:45 p.m., after calling Jennifer's friends and checking with neighbors, Patricia and Robert Lawson called the police. Officer Dale Simmons arrived within minutes, immediately recognizing the uncharacteristic nature of the disappearance based on Jennifer's reputation and the Lawsons' visible distress. We took it seriously from minute one, recalls retired police chief Raymond Walker, who was a patrol sergeant in 1996. Sometimes with teenagers, there's a waiting period because they're off with friends or testing boundaries. But everything about this felt different. The Lawsons weren't overreacting. Their daughter wasn't where she was supposed to be, and that wasn't like her. By 9 p.m., the first search teams were organized. By midnight, over 200 community volunteers had gathered at Oakwood Methodist Church, which quickly established itself as search headquarters. Pastor Mark Holloway opened the church doors, set up a phone bank, and coordinated with police to organize search grid. The following morning brought a disturbing discovery. Jennifer's dark blue backpack was found torn and partially emptied in a drainage ditch approximately 200 yards from the school, the opposite direction from her home route. Roughly 100 yards further along Maple Street, a single running shoe matched to Jennifer was recovered near a streetlight that locals reported had been flickering for weeks. Finding those items scattered like that changed the tone of the investigation immediately, said Walker. This wasn't a runaway scenario. The torn backpack, the single shoe, it painted a picture of struggle that chilled everyone involved. The initial search expanded rapidly. K-9 units were brought in from Columbus. A state police helicopter conducted aerial searches of the surrounding woodlands and field. Dive teams checked Oakwood Pond and the creek that ran through Cunningham Park. The FBI sent 2 agents specializing in child abductions to assist local law enforcement. Media coverage was immediate and intense. Channel 7 from nearby Dayton ran hourly update. The headline, "Local Teen Vanishes, Community Rallies," ran above the fold in the Oakwood Journal, accompanied by Jennifer's school portrait, a smiling girl with shoulder-length blonde hair and bright blue eyes that seemed to look directly at readers, asking for help. Flyers featuring Jennifer's photo and description appeared on every telephone pole, storefront, and community bulletin board within a 50-mile radius. Volunteers distributed them at highway rest stops across 3 states. The Lawsons appeared on regional news programs, Patricia clutching her daughter's silver charm bracelet, a 16th birthday gift from Jennifer's grandmother that had been left on her dresser that morning. Someone knows something, Robert Lawson, a shift supervisor at the Dayton manufacturing plant, said during one tearful press conference. Please, if you saw anything unusual that evening, no matter how small, call the police. Our daughter just wants to come home. As days turned to weeks, the investigation pursued multiple leads. Forensics teams recovered hair samples and preserved fingernail scrapings from items in Jennifer's gym bag, which had been found discarded behind the school dumpsters. Technicians worked with grainy CCTV footage from a gas station 2 blocks from the school, trying to enhance images of vehicles passing during the critical timeframe. The initial suspect list focused on those in Jennifer's immediate circle. Her boyfriend, Thomas Larkin, was quickly cleared when 12 teammates and a coach confirmed he was at basketball practice when Jennifer disappeared. The school janitor, William Ross, faced scrutiny when his time card showed discrepancies with witness accounts, but a thorough search of his home and vehicle yielded nothing. A neighbor, Edward Miller, who had previously received a harassment complaint from another teenage girl, was investigated but ultimately eliminated as a suspect when his alibi checked out. The investigation was hampered by the technological limitations of 1996. DNA testing existed but required larger samples than what was recovered. The CCTV footage, even after enhancement, proved too grainy to identify license plates or drivers clearly. Cell phones were not yet ubiquitous, meaning no digital footprint to trace. As spring turned to summer with no resolution, the case began to experience what investigators call momentum decay. Media coverage dwindled. Weekly searches became monthly vigils. The FBI agents returned to their field office. New cases demanded local police resources. Perhaps most painful for the Lawsons were the rumors that inevitably filled the information vacuum. Whispers circulated about Jennifer running away with an older boyfriend, about family problems, about teenage rebellion, all completely unfounded but deeply hurtful to a family already suffering unimaginable pain. The not knowing is unbearable, Patricia Lawson told a reporter on the 6-month mark of her daughter's disappearance. Every time the phone rings, every time there's a knock at the door, for a split second you think maybe it's news, maybe it's Jennifer, and then it's not, and you have to learn to breathe again. By November 1998, after all leads had been exhausted, the case was officially designated cold. Jennifer's file was shelved in the Oakwood Police Department's records room, taken out only for annual reviews that inevitably ended with the same notation. No new leads, no progress. For the Lawson family and the community of Oakwood, life continued, but with an unhealed wound and an unanswered question that would take nearly 3 decades to resolve. The mystery of what happened on that March evening in 1996 would eventually find answers through technological advances unimaginable at the time, and reveal a truth more shocking than anyone could have anticipated. The investigation into Jennifer Lawson's disappearance began with urgency and resources rarely seen in Oakwood's small police department. Chief Walker established a dedicated task force, commandeering the station's conference room as a war room where timeline charts, suspect boards, and maps covered every available surface. Officers worked overtime, following up on hundreds of tips that flooded the hotline set up at Oakwood Methodist Church. In those first few weeks we pursued every possible angle, recalled Detective Marcus Reynolds, who served as lead investigator. We interviewed all 213 students in Jennifer's grade, every teacher, coach, and staff member at the high school. We checked alibis, cross-referenced statements, and mapped out the movements of every known sex offender within a 50-mile radius. The physical evidence, though limited, painted a disturbing picture. Jennifer's backpack showed signs of a violent struggle, the strap torn not at the seam but through the fabric itself, requiring significant force. The scattered contents formed a trail suggesting she had been dragged while fighting to hold onto her possessions. Her single recovered shoe contained scuff marks consistent with being forcibly removed during a struggle. Forensic technicians collected hair samples, fibers, and the precious fingernail scrapings that would later prove crucial. In 1996, however, DNA testing required larger samples than what was available, and the tests performed yielded only the frustrating result of insufficient sample for conclusive analysis. The investigation's most promising early lead came from Elaine Winters, an elderly resident who lived on Maple Street. While walking her dog at approximately 6:25 p.m., she reported seeing a blue pickup truck driving slowly past the high school, then making a U-turn to pass again. The driver seemed to be looking for someone, Winters told police. I noticed because he was driving so slowly, and my dog barked at the truck both times it passed. Unfortunately, Winters couldn't identify the make or model of the truck beyond its color, nor could she describe the driver beyond noting it was, definitely a man. Police canvassed the area for blue trucks, documenting 37 in Oakwood alone, but without more specific details. This lead ultimately proved too general to narrow down suspects. Another potential break came when Jennifer's library card was discovered 3 months after her disappearance in a ditch along Route 48, approximately 7 miles from Oakwood. A massive search of the surrounding area yielded no additional evidence, and investigators were left wondering if the card had been deliberately planted to mislead them or accidentally dropped while the perpetrator was in transit. As summer approached, the case took an unsettling turn when anonymous calls began coming into the tip line, claiming to have information about Jennifer's whereabouts. Each call led investigators down fruitless paths, consuming valuable resources and raising false hope. Analysis of the calls eventually determined they were likely coming from attention seekers rather than individuals with actual knowledge of the crime. Those false leads were particularly cruel, said Patricia Lawson years later. Each one would raise our hopes, only to crush them again. It was like losing her repeatedly. By the fall of 1996, the investigation had hit wall after wall. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, which had assisted in the initial weeks, withdrew as new cases demanded their attention. The dedicated tip line at the church received fewer and fewer calls. Media coverage dwindled to occasional mentions on the anniversary of Jennifer's disappearance. Robert Lawson took a leave of absence from his job to continue organizing volunteer searches every weekend, focusing on increasingly remote areas of the county. These efforts, while demonstrating the family's refusal to give up hope, yielded no new evidence. Jennifer's younger brother, Michael, then 13, struggled with his sister's absence and the transformation of his family. Once an average student, he threw himself into academics with an intensity that worried his teachers. I thought if I was perfect, maybe it would bring her back, he later explained in an interview. Like the universe would trade my success for her return. The case suffered another setback when a promising lead, a similar abduction attempt in a neighboring county, proved to have no connection to Jennifer's case when the perpetrator was caught and had a solid alibi for March 12. Detective Reynolds, who had by then transferred all other cases to colleagues to focus exclusively on Jennifer's disappearance, found himself increasingly isolated. I had her photo on my desk. I drove her route home every day trying to see something I'd missed. I interviewed some witnesses 4-5 times, hoping for new details. But at some point, you have to admit you're going in circles. The technological limitations of the era proved frustrating. The grainy CCTV footage from the gas station, the only camera that might have captured Jennifer's route, was enhanced using the best available technology, but still couldn't provide clear images of license plates or drivers' faces. Without modern cell phone tracking, digital footprints, or widespread surveillance cameras, investigators lacked the tools that would become standard in later decades. In November 1998, after all conventional investigative avenues had been exhausted, Jennifer's case was officially designated cold. Her file, now filling 3 large boxes, was moved to the department's storage room, with a notation that it should be reviewed annually and whenever new technological advances might offer fresh approaches. For the Lawson family, this bureaucratic designation was devastating. It felt like the system was giving up on our daughter, Robert Lawson told the Oakwood Journal. We understand they've done everything they can with what they have, but for us, this isn't over. It will never be over until we know what happened to Jennifer. The family established a modest scholarship in Jennifer's name at Oakwood High School, awarded annually to a student who demonstrated the same commitment to academics, athletics, and community service that had defined their daughter's too short life. The annual presentation of this scholarship became a way for the community to remember Jennifer and support the Lawsons. Patricia eventually returned to teaching, though she requested a transfer from elementary to high school, later explaining, "I needed to be around children Jennifer's age. It helped me feel connected to her." Robert became involved in advocacy for missing children, helping other families navigate the bewildering experience they had endured. As years passed, the case faded from public consciousness. Annual mentions in the local paper grew shorter. The vigils attracted fewer attendees. Newer residents of Oakwood sometimes expressed surprise when learning about the case that had once defined the town. The investigation entered a dormant phase, with Detective Reynolds, until his retirement in 2012, reviewing the file each year on the anniversary of Jennifer's disappearance. These reviews resulted in the same frustrating notation: no new leads, no new evidence, no progress to report. For 24 years, Jennifer Lawson's disappearance remained an open wound for her family and an unsolved mystery for the Oakwood Police Department, a constant reminder of justice delayed and questions unanswered. What no one could know was that the evidence collected in those first crucial days, preserved in the department's evidence room, contained the key that would eventually unlock the truth, once technology caught up with the crime. In January 2020, the landscape of cold case investigations in Ohio changed dramatically when the state allocated special funding for modernizing evidence testing and establishing dedicated cold case units in counties that previously lacked resources for such specialized teams. Oakwood, falling under Montgomery County's jurisdiction, became eligible for this initiative, and Jennifer Lawson's case was among the first selected for review. Detective Sarah Watkins, who was appointed to lead the newly formed cold case unit, had a personal connection to unsolved crimes that fueled her dedication. 20 years earlier, her own sister had been murdered in Cincinnati, a case that remained unsolved despite substantial evidence. This experience had shaped Watkins' career and given her unique insight into the perspectives of families waiting for answers. "When I look at a cold case, I don't just see a file number," Watkins explained in an interview. "I see the ripple effects, the parents who can't move on, the siblings who grow up in the shadow of tragedy, the community that loses its sense of safety. These aren't just unsolved crimes, they're ongoing traumas." Her first action upon receiving Jennifer's case was to conduct a complete inventory of all preserved evidence. The 3 boxes from storage revealed meticulous work by the original investigators, every item properly sealed, labeled, and documented with chain-of-custody forms. Among these items were the fingernail scrapings taken from Jennifer's gym bag, samples that had yielded insufficient DNA for analysis using 1996 technology. Looking at the original lab reports, I realized immediately that what was considered insufficient sample size in the 90s would be more than adequate with today's techniques, said Watkins. DNA testing has undergone several revolutions since Jennifer disappeared. We can now get usable profiles from samples 1,000 times smaller than what was needed back then. Watkins submitted the fingernail scrapings to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation's newly upgraded forensic lab in March 2020. Using next-generation sequencing technologies, technicians were able to extract a complete DNA profile that didn't match Jennifer's own genetic material, evidence of foreign DNA, potentially from her abductor. Getting that call from the lab was one of those career moments you never forget, Watkins recalled. After 24 years, we finally had a concrete piece of evidence pointing to a specific individual. The question was, who did this DNA belong to? The first step was running the profile through Cody's, the the combined DNA index system that contains DNA profiles from criminal offenders nationwide. This search returned no matches, indicating the perpetrator had either never been convicted of a crime requiring DNA submission or had committed the crime before such requirements were common. This setback didn't deter Watkins. By 2020, a new investigative technique had emerged that didn't exist during the original investigation: forensic genetic genealogy. This approach involves uploading DNA profiles to public genealogy databases where users have opted into law enforcement matching, then using family trees to narrow down potential suspects. With court approval, the DNA profile was uploaded to GEDmatch, a database where users can voluntarily make their DNA results available for law enforcement searches in violent crime cases. The results provided what geneticists call distant cousins, individuals sharing enough DNA with the unknown suspect to establish family connections, but not close enough for immediate identification. Forensic genealogist Dr. Eleanor Montgomery was brought in to build family trees from these matches. It's like putting together an enormous puzzle where you start from the edges and work inward, Dr. Montgomery explained. We build out the family trees of each genetic match, looking for the points where they intersect, which leads us toward our unknown subject. After 3 months of painstaking work, tracing ancestry records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, obituaries, and social media connections, Dr. Montgomery identified a family cluster with the surname Patterson. The DNA suggested the unknown subject was likely a male member of this family's particular branch, which had deep roots in Montgomery County, Ohio. This breakthrough coincided with another significant development. In April 2021, a construction crew breaking ground for a new housing development on the outskirts of Miamisburg, approximately 12 miles from where Jennifer disappeared, uncovered human remains. Forensic anthropologists determined the remains had been buried for 20-plus years, and dental records confirmed what the Lawson family had both feared and suspected for decades: the remains were Jennifer's. Finding Jennifer brought a certain measure of closure, Patricia Lawson said at a private press conference. But it also reopened the wound and intensified our need for answers. Who took our daughter? Why? How long has this person been walking free while we suffered? The discovery of Jennifer's remains provided additional evidence. The forensic examination indicated she had likely died from blunt force trauma to the head, and the condition of her clothing confirmed a violent struggle had occurred. Most importantly, DNA evidence recovered from her remains matched the profile extracted from the fingernail scrapings, strengthening the case. Armed with both the genetic genealogy results and the additional evidence from Jennifer's remains, Detective Watkins and her team began narrowing their focus to male members of the Patterson family who would have been in the Oakwood area in 1996. 3 candidates emerged. James Patterson, 52 in 1996, a long-haul truck driver who occasionally stayed with family in Oakwood. Thomas Patterson, 38 in 1996, who worked at a hardware store 3 miles from Oakwood High School. Robert Patterson, 42 in 1996, a former volunteer firefighter who lived 4 blocks from the Lawson family. Discreet background investigations eliminated James Patterson, who records showed was in Indianapolis on the night of Jennifer's disappearance. Thomas Patterson was more difficult to clear, but eventually documentation of an emergency appendectomy that had him hospitalized on March 12 to 14, 1996, removed him from the suspect list. This left Robert Patterson as the prime suspect. His connection to the case turned out to be more complex and disturbing than investigators initially realized. Review of the original case files revealed that Patterson had been one of the first community volunteers to join the search for Jennifer, had attended multiple vigils over the years, and had even made a modest annual donation to the scholarship fund established in her name. Finding his name repeatedly in the volunteer logs was chilling, said Watkins. Here was someone potentially involved in her disappearance, inserting himself into the investigation, watching the police work, monitoring the family's grief, It's a pattern we've seen in other predatory killers, but it never fails to disturb. Another crucial discovery came when investigators revisited Elaine Winter's statement about seeing a blue pickup truck near the school the evening Jennifer disappeared. A review of vehicle registration records from 1996 confirmed that Robert Patterson owned a blue Ford F-150 at that time, a detail that hadn't seemed significant when hundreds of tips were flooding in, but now took on new importance in light of the DNA evidence. With Patterson now the focus of their investigation, the cold case unit needed one final piece to confirm their suspicions: a modern DNA sample for comparison. Rather than alerting Patterson by requesting a voluntary sample, they opted for covert collection of abandoned DNA, items discarded in public from which DNA could legally be collected without a warrant. In October 2024, surveillance teams tracked Patterson, now 71 and retired, to his regular breakfast spot at the Oakwood Diner. After he left, investigators recovered his used coffee cup, which lab technicians processed immediately for DNA comparison. The results were conclusive. The DNA from Patterson's coffee cup matched both the profile from Jennifer's fingernail scrapings and the evidence recovered from her remains with 100% certainty. Modern DNA technology had finally put a name to the killer who had walked free for nearly 3 decades. With this confirmation, Detective Watkins secured an arrest warrant for Robert Patterson on charges of kidnapping and first-degree murder. In the early morning hours of January 15, 2025, a tactical team surrounded Patterson's retirement community apartment and took him into custody without incident. The arrest sent shockwaves through Oakwood. Many residents still remembered Patterson as a concerned community member who had helped in the search for Jennifer, never suspecting he was hiding the darkest secret imaginable. The most sophisticated forensic technology in the world brought justice to Jennifer Lawson, announced Montgomery County Prosecutor Elena Vasquez at a press conference following the arrest. But equally important was the dedication of investigators who never forgot her, and the preservation of evidence that waited patiently for science to catch up with the truth. The arrest of Robert Patterson sent seismic waves through Oakwood, a community that had never fully recovered from Jennifer Lawson's disappearance. Patterson wasn't just any resident. He was a former volunteer firefighter, a deacon at First Baptist Church, and a fixture at community events. Most disturbing of all, he had been one of the most visible volunteers in the original search for Jennifer, organizing prayer vigils and comfort meals for the Lawson family. "We invited him into our home," Robert Lawson said, his voice breaking during a brief statement to the press. "He sat at our table while we grieved. He held my wife's hand at the memorial service, all while knowing exactly what had happened to our daughter." The revelation triggered a profound identity crisis for Oakwood. The town had long defined itself as a place where neighbors looked out for one another, where doors remained unlocked, and where the tragedy of Jennifer's disappearance was viewed as an aberration, a darkness that had come from outside. Learning that the monster had been among them all along forced a painful reckoning with assumptions about safety and trust. "It's like finding out your family history was a lie," said Pastor Mark Holloway, who had worked closely with Patterson at community events for decades. "How do you process the fact that someone you prayed with, someone you trusted, could harbor such evil? It challenges everything you believe about your ability to judge character." As news of the arrest spread, more disturbing connections emerged. Patterson had worked as a volunteer at Oakwood High School's athletic department from 1990 to 1998, helping maintain equipment for various sports teams, including volleyball. This position had given him regular access to the school and knowledge of student schedules, including Jennifer's practice times. Even more chilling, yearbook photos revealed Patterson in the background of team pictures, including one where Jennifer stood just a few feet away, an innocent moment captured months before her disappearance that now appeared sinister in retrospect. Former students came forward with stories that, while seeming merely odd at the time, now took on darker implications. Sarah Drexler, who had been a sophomore when Jennifer disappeared, recalled Patterson offering her rides home from practice on multiple occasions. "I always declined because something felt off," she told investigators. "Nothing I could put my finger on, just an instinct. Now I wonder if that instinct saved my life." The interrogation of Patterson proved frustrating for investigators. After his initial denial and subsequent request for legal counsel, he maintained absolute silence, refusing to provide any details about the crime or his motivations. This silence extended to his court appearances, where he offered no explanation for his actions, denying the Lawson family even the cold comfort of understanding why their daughter had been targeted. Patterson's defense attorney, public defender Martin Levy, focused his strategy on challenging the DNA evidence, arguing that Patterson's presence at search sites and contact with Jennifer's belongings during volunteer efforts could explain the genetic material found. "Contact does not equal murder," became the defense's mantra, repeated in pretrial motions and press statements. Prosecutor Elena Vasquez methodically dismantled this theory, bringing in expert witnesses who testified that the DNA under Jennifer's fingernails and on her clothing indicated a violent struggle, not casual contact. "The defendant wants you to believe he touched evidence while searching," Vasquez told the jury during opening statements. "The science tells us Jennifer fought her attacker, literally scratching for her life." The trial began in June 2025, nearly 3 decades after Jennifer's disappearance. The courthouse overflowed with spectators, many of them Oakwood residents who had participated in the original searches, now grappling with the revelation that they had been working alongside the very person responsible for the tragedy. The prosecution built a meticulous case, presenting the DNA evidence, the vehicle connection, and Patterson's suspicious insertion of himself into the investigation. They established a pattern of behavior. Patterson had volunteered at 3 other search efforts for missing persons in neighboring counties during the 1990s, raising questions about potential additional victims. Former Detective Marcus Reynolds, now in his 70s, testified about his interactions with Patterson during the original investigation. "He was always there, always asking questions about what we knew, what evidence we had found," Reynolds recalled on the stand. "At the time, I interpreted it as community concern. Now I understand he was monitoring our progress, staying one step ahead." Jennifer's brother Michael, now 42 and a prosecutor himself in another state, delivered powerful victim impact testimony. "For 29 years I've lived with a hole in my family," he told the court. "I've lived with the pain of not knowing, with the memory of my parents crying themselves to sleep night after night. I've lived with the ghost of my sister, forever 16, forever missing from holiday tables and family milestones." Michael described how his sister's disappearance had shaped his own life choices. His decision to pursue criminal justice, his overprotectiveness of his own children, his struggles with trust. "The defendant didn't just take Jennifer's life," he said. "He fractured all of ours." After a 3-week trial and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Patterson, now 71 and appearing frail in his orange jumpsuit, showed no visible reaction as the judgment was read. Judge Samantha Torres sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the maximum penalty available under Ohio law. "No sentence can restore what was taken from the Lawson family," Judge Torres stated. "No punishment can adequately address the magnitude of this crime or the decades of suffering it caused. But today, at long last, justice acknowledges Jennifer Lawson and recognizes the truth of what happened on that March evening in 1996. For the Lawson family, the verdict brought a complicated mixture of emotions. There's no such thing as closure. I hate that word, Patricia Lawson told reporters afterward. Jennifer is still gone. But there is a certain peace in knowing her killer will die behind bars, in knowing he can't hurt anyone else's daughter." The impact on Oakwood extended beyond the courthouse. The case prompted uncomfortable conversations about community vigilance and the limits of knowing one's neighbors. It led to a re-examination of volunteer protocols for missing persons cases and increased emphasis on background checks for those working with youth. The Jennifer Lawson Memorial Scholarship Fund, which had provided modest support to one student annually for decades, received an influx of donations following the verdict. The Lawson family expanded its mission to include funding for forensic science education and cold case investigation resources. Perhaps most significantly, the case demonstrated the power of preserving evidence and the value of persistent investigation. Science caught up to this crime, Detective Watkins noted at a law enforcement conference months later. But science needed humans to maintain the chain of custody, to keep reviewing the file year after year, to believe that answers were possible even when leads ran cold. On what would have been Jennifer's 46th birthday, the Oakwood community gathered for a different kind of memorial service, not a somber vigil marked by uncertainty, but a celebration of justice finally served. At the ceremony, Michael Lawson announced the establishment of the Jennifer Lawson Cold Case Foundation, dedicated to supporting DNA testing for other unsolved cases across Ohio. "My sister's case proves that no matter how much time passes, the truth can still come to light," he told the assembled crowd. "We owe it to every family still waiting for answers to keep searching, to keep testing, to keep believing that justice, however delayed, remains possible." As the sun set over Oakwood that evening, longtime residents reflected on the long journey from tragedy to truth. The case had changed them, challenging their assumptions about safety, exposing vulnerabilities in their community, revealing the darkness that had lived undetected among them. But it had also demonstrated the power of persistence, the advancement of science, and the enduring commitment to justice that ultimately prevailed, even after nearly 3 decades of waiting. Jennifer Lawson was finally at rest, her story complete, her memory honored not just as a victim but as the catalyst for changes that would help other families find the answers they so desperately sought.